Now it's time to create our third mesh network for the road elements which are running in the Z direction. Rather than having to tediously build a new mesh network, we can duplicate an existing mesh network. In the mesh editor, right click on Mesh 2 Road Main and select Duplicate Network. Duplicating a network not only creates a new mesh network in repro mesh, it also duplicates any locators and follows, as well as the original geometry that has been created with the mesh network. Let's replace the suffix of the new mesh network and any of its child objects from Mesh 2 Road Main 1 to Mesh 3 Road Cross. I'll just go ahead and do this and join you again in a second. Now that everything is renamed, let's deactivate the signal, offset, and spring node of the Mesh 3 network. And let's select the transform locator for Mesh 3. And now we will move this, making sure our grid snap is selected. So undo that. And rotate, and I'm just going to switch on my step snap rotation. 15 degrees. Hide that again. There we go. Just move it over one. We don't need the first replicator for this mesh node. So rather than delete it, we'll just switch it off for just now. And in our distribute node, we're going to change our number of points to 19 and our distance to 18. Just going to reduce our number of replicants there down to 2. Just move that back across one. I don't think that was looking right. And go up to 3. That's better. We need to add the second road geometry, road 2, into this mesh network. That's the one with the yellow cross pattern. So to do this, let's select our main mesh point and move across to our repro node. In the repro node, we can see which geometry objects are being used in this mesh network. We can see that the object road 3 has been created when we duplicated the mesh network. Right click on road 03 and let's delete it. And let's delete it from the outliner. Back in our mesh network, select our road 1 and 2, and then our mesh editor, go back to our repro node, and using our middle mouse button, drag them across. Alternatively, we could have right-clicked and used Add Selected Objects from the outliner. We can't see the second geometry object, which is the road crossing object. To see it, we need to add an ID node to the network. So, selecting our network, let's add a ID node, which is here. Just move that down. And that's chosen an ID count of 2, but we need to set it to 6. Go back to the repro node and swap our order so that our road cross element is in the correct place. Let's reactivate the signal and offset nodes, as well as the spring. And just like that, we have all of our road sections animated. Before we get stuck into the building elements of our mesh networks, let's just hide the fall off objects using Control H so that we don't have an over-cluttered viewport. So I'm just going to select them in the outliner using Command and then main towers. So I'm just going to go into our building geometry and select tower floor. And let's create a new mesh network. There we go. Let's just rename this while we're here to mesh floor tower 01. Even though we have fixed the pivot, we can see that the mesh network has placed the center of the new repro mesh at the center of the world. There are many ways to fix this. The quickest way is to add a transform node. So we'll just do that here, add a transform node, and change its position to 0.5. There we go. And let's use 0.6 and 6. That's 6 and 6. And there we go. We're in the middle of our scene. And we're just going to switch the distribute node, switch the number of points to 16, zero out the X, and let's make the Y value 15. Great. To taper the tower, make the linear scale in X and Z minus 0.5. Oops, we have forgotten to create some antennas for our tower. This is quickly fixed. Let's just hide our mesh using Control H. And let's create a new polygon cylinder. So we'll go into our polygon shelf and create cylinder. Just going to go into here, into my polycylinder 1 attribute and change my radius to 0.05 and my height 3 and subdivision on my axis 12. Just switch to a wireframe view. Right click and select vertex. I'm going to select all the bottom vertices, making sure I have my grid snap on, press the W key and move that to the base. Switch back to object mode. I'm going to duplicate this using Control D twice. There we go. And move one of these cylinders 2 to the right and another one back 1. I'm going to shift select these 3 objects in the outliner and then in the mesh menu, I'm going to select combine. Maya does have a good Boolean toolset, but for what we need, combining these cylinders into one object is great. Switch back into vertex mode and I'm going to select the top vertices. There we go, and move them up 2 points. Maybe just move this one back down 1. Switch back to object mode. Assign existing material tower floor Lambert, that'll do. There we go. Just need to delete the history of this object because we have these P cylinder 3, 2, and 1 objects here, and that can sometimes get in the way. So edit, delete by type, history, and they're gone, so there'll be no issues. And we're just going to rename this object tower 01 antenna. Let's show our mesh for tower repro mesh again. There it is. And that's Shift H. I'm just going to rename this mesh for tower. Switch my viewport back to solid with textures by pressing 6. Oh, great. Zoom out. And I'm going to select my, I'm going to close this and select my mesh tower, move over to my repro node and select my tower, back over again, back to my repro node and add selected objects. Okay. Just going to hide Control H, that one. To see the antenna object, I'm going to need to add an ID node. So add ID node. There we go. However, to make a bit more sense of it, I need to increase the ID count to 15. And as before, they're out of order. So I just need to go back to my repro node and move that. There we go. We can see that we need to adjust the antennas so that they attach to the top of the building. So I'm just going to unhide my antenna geometry and just select on the vertexes so I can see everything. The great thing about using this method is that we can see everything update in our repro mesh at the same time. I might just move those over a little bit. That's good. And maybe just move those top ones down. That's better. We can see that our building is raised from the ground. We can use the transform node just to get us back down. Oh, and we just need to go a little bit lower, so minus 0.5. There we go. Don't worry about the fact that there is an antenna sticking out of the bottom of the building, as it will be obscured in our final animation. I'm just going to switch back to object mode and Control H to hide that. That's great. As with the road, we can use an offset node with a fall off to animate the tower appearing. So let's select our mesh node in our mesh editor, add an offset node. We're just going to create a new fall off, again by right clicking and create. Move our tower offset to the center, and in the attribute editor of our offset node, set the Y position to minus 15. There we go. offset rotation in Y to 10 degrees and the offset scale values to -1. Just need to increase the scale of our fall-off. Just select our scale attributes, middle mouse button, up to 35, say. And let's, in our attribute editor, just select our, make sure we've got our fall-off selected. And in the attribute editor, just select invert fall-off so that we can see our tower. Okay, so we're just going to animate this now. So I'm going to move us to frame 30, back in the channel box of our fall off, and I'm going to move our fall off to below the landscape. Right click and key selected. Just zoom out a bit so I can see what I'm doing. And then move to frame 60, there we go. And again, key selected. So now we have our tower appearing. And play it back again, just a bit more zoomed in. Might just change the amount of our offset in our Y, so we get a bit more. That's a great thing about procedural modeling. You can go back in and change it whenever you want, and the mesh system really gives brilliant feedback due to the power of Hardware Renderer 2.0 and all the various behind the scenes optimizations that the team of Autodesk have done. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Again, still a bit jerky, so let's just add a spring node just to give us a bit of life. Ah, that's much better. Yeah, very pleased with that. Okay, great. The only thing we need to fix is the fact that at the beginning of the animation, our repro mesh is showing under the building. This is dead easy, again with mesh. Let's just add a visibility node and create a fall off. I'm going to select the fall off, switch it to a cube, increase my inner zone to about 0.9. And then just move it slightly under our scene. Just check invert fall off, and now hopefully, there we go. Might just be a slight issue with that inner zone, so just reduce that a little bit. Use mesh to create another tower dead easily. So we're just going to duplicate our network here. And let's tidy up our new network. Let's switch off the visibility, the spring, the offset, and the ID node. And choose the transform node, and let's switch that position to 6, 0, 5, and 0. Oh. As we can see, as we have switched off the ID node, all we have is antennas. Let's fix this. When we duplicated the network, new antenna and tower geometry were created. Select the mesh for tower 02 in the mesh editor. And let's go along to our repro node. So tower 01 antenna and tower floor 1 have been created. So that's that guy. Let's delete him. And probably in our building. Yep, tower floor 01. There we go. So we go back to our mesh network, distribute. The reason that we're doing this is that we just don't want to have duplicate geometry everywhere. And so I'm now just going to middle mouse drag my tower floor, and there we go. Let's also just delete our tower 1 visibility node. Otherwise we'll have duplicates everywhere. And again, I'm just going to go away and tidy up the naming structure. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, we're done. So I'm just going to go back to our mesh forward distribute node and change the number of points to 10, distance Y to 9, and I'm going to 0 our scale attributes to remove the taper. In the tower transform node, I'm just going to change all our scale to 0.8. And I'm just going to change the position here to 1, and I'll probably rotate this 90 degrees. There we go. Let's switch our offset node and our spring node back on. And as we can see, our small tower is jumping up with its bigger brother. Let's adjust the timing of this second tower. Select the fall off Mesh 4 Tower 02 offset. There we go. And we can see the two red lines on the timeline, here at frame 30 and here at frame 60. We can quickly move these by shift clicking and dragging in the timeline. So I'm going to shift click, then use this middle guy to just move up to say frame 75. And now when we play our animation back, yeah, great. Two different timings. Okay, now we can switch back on our visibility node, and we can use our fall off from our first tower just by middle mouse button click and drag into our fall off object. And again, just by keeping everything tidy, minimizing our fall offs, Mesh is handling all the animation and visibility issues for us. Our final Mesh network, but just to let you know, I've gone through and hidden a couple of our fall off nodes here just to make our viewport a bit tidier. For the Mesh network of the smaller buildings, we do need to create a piece of new geometry which we can use as a base for generating and placing our buildings. To do this, let's move to the polygon shelf and create a new plane. In our channel box, let's input polyplane 3, width 5, 5, subdivisions 3 and 3. There we go. I'm going to duplicate this using Control D 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'm just going to move these into each of the respective city blocks. Making sure my grid snap is on. Just the W key. There we go. Just going to shift select these and come to our mesh menu and combine. And again, just to get rid of these small little groups here, edit, delete by type, history. There we go. I'm just going to rename this small building generator. And we are good to go. Oh, there's just one thing I need to do, which is under here, switch to face and making sure, let's just hide our infill repro mesh. So that's Control H. With our small building generator, switch that to face and let's just select these 6 faces and delete. And that's great. From our building geometry group, let's command select building 01, building 02, triangle building and building 04, and create our mesh network, move to the mesh shelf, create mesh network. In our distribute node, let's just change our distribution type to mesh. And we do need to connect to mesh. So we can do this by selecting our small building generator, back in the distribute node, and connect. And there we go. We need to change our method to face center, and let's just press flood mesh, and this places an instance in the center of each polygon face. So there we go. Of course, we're only seeing one object, and we know how to fix this by adding an ID node, which always selects the correct number of IDs for the number of geometry pieces that we put in. So here we can see our ID count is set to 4 and we have them distributed. What we can see, however, is that our pivots are off. Rather than having to worry about this and going back into our geometry, there is an easier way to fix this, which is I am going to select my 3 buildings which are causing me issues, which are those 3 buildings, and I'm going to create a group for each. So Control G, Control G, Control G, and just name this BG01G. That should have the building 1 in it. Yep. Do the same, BG02G and BG04G. Then we just need to go into our repro node of our mesh network, and we should have renamed this as well, mesh 5 buildings. Let's just change this quickly. So although we can access our repro node really quickly by pressing this little icon here, and we can get rid of our building 1, 2, and 3 and delete that, unfortunately, if I was to select these, command, press on this icon, I lose my selection. So unfortunately, I need to go BG, select my groups, into the building, attribute editor into the repro node, and add selected objects. Now, while that's fixed our building group 4, we can still see that our buildings 1 and 2 are slightly out, but that's not a problem. We can just go into our building 1 group, and in our building 1 channel box attributes, let's just translate to Y, and that fixes that, and we'll just do the same for building 2. Translate Y. And there we go, everything is now nice and aligned. Let's just hide our small building generator because we don't need it anymore, so that's select and Control H, and let's bring back up our repro mesh, so that is Shift H to view it. Now that we have all our buildings aligned, they all look a bit similar. Let's randomize them. The first way to do this is in the mesh ID buildings node, switch our ID type to random. And let's adjust the random seed to a level where we get a good distribution of buildings. Yeah, quite like, no, maybe too many. The triangle buildings in particular do need to be reorientated. So let's add an offset node and switch our rotation to 180. And let's go to the strength drop down, reduce the step strength to 0.2. We can adjust the height of all the buildings to give them a bit more life by adding a random node. Let's zero out all the position values and just adjust our scale 2.5. The issue with increasing the random scale is that it increases the heights of all the buildings. To counter this, let's add another offset node, set the scale to -0.5 in Y. That's better. In fact, I think we'll just increase our random height again to 1. There we go. Yeah, that's great. So we don't get confused, let's rename the offset nodes we have added. I'm going to call this first one offset orient, and the second one height fix. Final thing we need to do is animate the buildings popping into the scene. We need to add a final offset node. So let's just add that. And again, let's create a fall off. Let's move it to the center of our scene. We just need to make sure our offset scale is set to 0. And let's scale using the channel box. Their offset selected. Scale. Middle mouse button. There we go. And let's make sure all our buildings are hidden. Let's move our timeline to frame 45. Right click again and key selected. And let's move to frame 70. Middle mouse button again to reduce down to 0. There we go. And right click again and key selected. Okay, so there we go. Our buildings, and again, just to give a bit of pop, literally, let's just add a spring node. Modeling and animation, all we need to do now is to set up our render. We can use a hardware viewport 2.0 render for this animation, which is what we have been using throughout our whole build process. To see what we will render, In the viewport view menu, which is view here in camera settings, let's switch our resolution gate on, which will show our render cutoff areas. Let's reposition our frame to capture all of that. And I'm just going to hide my mesh editor so we can get a bit more of the view. Okay, that's good. Let's hide our grid again. And let's just look at some of the key attributes for Hardware Renderer 2.0. So in a Viewport 2.0 menu selection, let's click on our options. In the screen-based ambient occlusion, let's enable that, and that grounds the objects in our scene. Just going to close the outliner so we can see it a bit better. There we go. In the scroll down to our anti-aliasing and switch on multi-sampling anti-aliasing, and our sample count is set to 8. On some hardware it may be higher, but for this machine that's absolutely fine. When we press play, dependent on your hardware, the animation should still play at a brisk pace, even with these viewport settings, especially when compared to an equivalent scene in Cinema 4D. We can still, however, see some transform locators and fall-off objects for the buildings. We can hide these by unchecking show locators in the viewport. So let's just do that. Show locators. To make the scene a bit more lively, let's add some lights. In the lighting viewport menu, let's switch on use all lights. We could have pressed the number 7 as well. And let's switch to the renderings shelf and add an ambient light, which is down in the bottom there. It's a bit too bright, but rather than reduce the intensity, let's just change the color to a sky blue because we want this light to mimic the sky. That's good. And we will just change the value of that down to about 0.65. We're going to add a directional light now to be our sun. Okay, and let's just move that so that we can see it. That's showing our lights, so show lights, there we go, we can now see it. See a small arrow there, let's just orientate that and move it around. The other thing we should do is in our lighting menu, add shadows. There we go. And we're also going to just, in our shadows, use depth map shadows and increase our resolution to 2048 to reduce jaggies. And now you should get some nice, strong shadows. Just going to switch my step snap off, so double click. Oh, there's my tool settings are hiding there. So double click and switch off relative step snap. There we go. Yeah, that's good. As this is our sun, I'm just going to give that a slight tint of yellow. A bit more. And increase the intensity to 2. So I might just knock that back a bit, and 1.5. The final light we can add is a point light, which is this one here. And we're just going to use that to pressing the W key to give a bit of secondary light onto this front face. But for this one, I am just going to keep this white and reduce the intensity to 0.4. We can now render. So let's open the render settings by pressing the render settings icon here. Alternatively, we could switch to our rendering menu and go to render settings. Let's bring that across. In the common tab of the render settings, let's first check our color management settings, which are here. Here we've got this set up correctly. We have our apply out transform to renderer, and our output transform is sRGB gamma, which matches the sRGB gamma that we've been using in our viewport. Our image format is set to PNG, and we've also set our frame animation to name hash.extension, and we can see a preview of what our file name will be up here, and we've already set our end frame to 90 which is the full width of our animation, just making sure we're not capturing everything. Yep, 90 is great. And final thing is we'll just check that our preset is set to HD 1080, which it is. That's fantastic. To render an animation, Maya can render in the background and allow you to carry on working with Maya using render and batch render. So we'll just set that off. And we are done. This has saved the images to our images folder, which we can then drop into After Effects to preview our finished animation. I've already done this, so I'm just going to quickly switch to After Effects. And here is a little comp that I set up earlier with a previous render, and here is our hardware viewpoint 2.0, and here's just a gradient, and as we were using PNG, the transparent background came in. That's great. So we have now finished our first Maya scene. All that is potentially left is to do a bit of tidying up in the outliner using groups for our lights and fall-offs and repro meshes, but I can leave you to do that. I really hope that you have enjoyed our first Cinema 4D to Maya tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you